In 1997, Bill Clinton is the President of the United States, just starting his second term, right before the Monica Lewinsky scandal is about to blow up. Princess Diana was killed in a car crash in the summer of 1997. 1.5 billion people around the world watched her funeral. 1997 was also the year that we lost the notorious B.I.G. He was killed in a drive-by shooting. The movie Titanic was released that year, one of the highest grossing movies of all time. And on top of the Billboard music charts were artists like Puff Daddy and Mariah Carey, Spice Girls, and Hanson. 1997 was a confusing year. But I'm sharing all of this context because 1997 was the year that I moved to America for the first time. Actually, specifically here to the Twin Cities. And I had never lived in America, so culture shock was real. So I coped by inventing the selfie. Actually, just kidding. This is the first selfie I ever took. And it was actually time-stamped with 1997, so I know it's legit, unlike selfies today. And I took it with a film camera, so I actually had to wait to see how it would turn out. Such delayed self-gratification. So it's not a legit selfie. So I was born in Bangkok, Thailand. My mom is Thai. My dad is some mix of exotic European cultures that essentially make him a white guy. My parents met in Bangkok in the 1970s, and so often I have to remind myself to be grateful that I even exist, because somehow these two people from opposite ends of the world found each other and had a deep enough connection to create me. My mom was born in an area called Buriram in northern Thailand, known as Isan, and this is the poorest part of the country. My mom was born into extreme poverty. I'm pretty sure that most of her childhood was spent without shoes and not a lot of food. She was surviving, literally surviving, from the age of 10 on her own, and there are still many stories of trauma that I will probably never know. Somehow though, she made her way to Bangkok, and while working as a waitress in her early 20s, she met my dad, who was a wandering American hippie who left the US after time served in the Air Force during the Vietnam War. My dad was born in Michigan, the eldest of 9 children to first-generation German immigrants who later found their way to St. Michael, Minnesota, originally indigenous land. My grandfather worked as a laborer in breweries in Minneapolis. Beer factories, not craft breweries. Much more hardcore, but likely just as white and bearded. My grandmother was a waitress at a smokiest supper club in Monticello. So, for a year after the Air Force, my dad blacktopped roads and he drove a truck to save up money while living at home with 8 siblings in a 2-bedroom home. Likely he wanted to get the hell out of there, so when he had $600, he bought a one-way ticket to Bangkok, Thailand. And just when he was out of money and thinking about returning to the US, his brother Randy actually lost his finger in a factory back in Minneapolis and got a significant settlement for that finger. So he flew over to Thailand to hang out with my dad, and the two of them ended up living off the settlement. Consequently, my mom got pregnant with me, and the settlement money was running low. So my dad and my uncle tapped into a marketable skill they already had and started teaching English in Bangkok. This actually later inspires my dad's career path, and he returns to the US briefly to get a degree in education. So he's overloaded with student loans, a wife, and 2 kids. I should probably mention one of my brothers was born at this timeline. There he is. And my dad learns of an opportunity to teach in Saudi Arabia, where they pay English teachers twice as much as they do in the US. So off we go to Jeddah, and my childhood is thereby shaped by life in Saudi Arabia and later Egypt. So this is my high school graduation ceremony held at the Great Pyramids of Giza. It's not photoshopped, I promise. So here we are, class of 1997, lined up on a pyramid. Of course, everyone is all formal, and I'm all posed up there. You can kind of see me on the left circled with my girlfriends, like this photo is gonna go on Instagram or something. So the thing about growing up in Egypt as an American teenager is that you have no real sense of belonging. You grow up in between cultures and identities. Home is a really fluid concept. There's actually a term for people like me. We're called third culture kids. A first culture is that of your parents. And for me, that was even split between Thai and American. The second culture is the country that you grow up in. And so for me, that was Egyptian culture. And the third culture is the one that you form in order to make sense of your in-betweenness. This third culture for me, this was built on speaking Arabic slang mixed with English, knowing more about Ramadan than the 4th of July, feeling comfort in the Muslim prayer that blasted over loudspeakers 5 times a day from sunup to sundown, having Thai food for Thanksgiving and ornaments on a palm tree at Christmas, best friends who were Trinidadian, Canadian, or Indonesian and Dutch, an American high school that had a brilliant theater and arts program, but every other month, the entire campus would be evacuated out onto the soccer field while dogs and SWAT teams searched our classrooms for bombs. See, I lived in Egypt during the Iraq wars, so a school full of American kids in the Middle East seemed like a perfect target for threats. And this was alarming because this is actually, remember, in the context before schools got shot up. So really, really scary. So I begged my dad to videotape, yes, VHS tape, MTV during his trips back to the US so I would have some sense of how to talk and dress and act like an American teenager. And all of that was my reality, and it's from there that I moved to Minnesota for college in 1997. So I share all of this with you because this is my context, and context unlocks understanding. Everything I tell you from this point on will be understood through the context that you now know about me. As a curator, I choose how to tell stories. Context is essentially my medium. To me, the role of a curator is to select, to understand, to create connection between art and audiences, between artists and communities. I find deep meaning in the work that I do. I also feel like this is the work that I'm meant to do. But it hasn't always been this way, trust me. I haven't always had this depth of understanding or confidence in my work. This is actually really new for me. I've been self-employed or freelance status for most of my adult life. And that struggle, the struggle of the hustle, the struggle of sacrifice, stability, self-doubt, 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 imposter syndrome, more self-doubt, stress, breaking point, burnout, broken, literally broke, self-doubt, again and again. I've been through it in the last 15 years as I've invested in building a career that means something to me. And where I have found that meaning is through an understanding of the ever-changing context of my life and my choices. Perhaps my childhood of in-betweenness, of always having to adapt to changing circumstances, taught me that in every moment and interaction, you actually have the power to choose how you want to experience it. So there's a really cute story that illustrates this idea. I need water, hold on. So an Indian guru comes across 3 stone cutters. And obviously the context of the story is like in the ancient past, because what are stone cutters today? Probably big machines. You don't talk to those. So they're workers. So this Indian guru comes across these 3 stone cutters, and he asks the first stone cutter, he says, "What are you doing?" And the stone cutter says, "Oh, I'm cutting these huge stones, and I'm carrying them over there, and it's the hardest work, and it's repetitive, and it's hot out here." And so the guru continues on to the second stone cutter. And he asks him the same question. He says, "What are you doing?" And the stonecutter says, "I'm making a living. I'm providing for myself and my family. And to tell you the truth, I think my stone cutting is actually an art." And so he walks over to the third stonecutter and he asks the same question, "What are you doing?" And this stonecutter says, "Can't you see? I'm building the most incredible grand temple, a beautiful space where people from all over the world will gather in peace and meditation." So I love that story because there are two pivotal moments that I want to share with you that I think illustrate how looking at the bigger picture and considering the context rather than the task itself reveals something about where I am today, because context is shaped by what we choose to remember and the details that we decide are important. In 2004, when I was 24 years old, I started a magazine, and it was called Industry. I was an English major out of college, so editor-in-chief sounded like a good boss title. It was a pocket-sized print magazine, and we distributed around 20,000 copies in the metro area for free every other month. This might have been one of the riskiest, most ambitious things I have ever done. A lot of creative people collaborated and contributed to this publication. I did not do it alone. And it was significant because there was really nothing like it at the time. Remember, 2004 was pre-social media boom. So Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Squarespace, Instagram, not a thing yet. I think the magazine had a MySpace page at one point. Not that it was effective. Knowing that context, imagine how exciting it was to produce a publication that became an outlet to showcase the work of emerging writers, artists, designers, and more, all of which was a world that I was just discovering here in the Twin Cities. We did features and profiles on creative people. This little mini magazine became a platform for various scenes of cultural production and various artistic communities. The magazine ultimately failed. In the end, I had to shut down the business after 3 years. I was so young and so naive, more passion than practicality, so I wasn't the strongest leader or business person. But here's what I know today. That little magazine was ahead of its time. It really felt unlimited. It saw bartenders, fashion designers, illustrators, skateboarders, dancers, interior designers, chefs, stylists, all as artists in their own right. It included articles that profiled small, locally owned businesses that people should support. There were articles about racism and politics. There were articles about community projects and social justice, deep think pieces on our music scene. And just organically, because it was how I saw the world, the writers, the models, the people featured in the magazine represented racially and culturally diverse perspectives. That little publication taught me how to trust my intuition and what it would take to do something that I felt passionate about, how much it would take to do that work. I should have mentioned earlier I was bartending at night and running a magazine during the day. This magazine taught me to collaborate with artists to create a platform for people to share their stories. And I know today that that was just the beginning of my investment in the local arts and cultural communities. So, pivotal moment number 2. After the magazine, I got a job working as a coordinator for an event space in the North Loop. Wasn't the North Loop then, it was just the seedy area on Washington. It was a beautiful loft space, and I don't really have any pictures of this space, but I do have this interior designer's rendering from when I first got the job, and it actually ended up looking a lot like this, except that the walls were covered in posters and art from Camel cigarettes, because this space was owned by Camel cigarettes, otherwise known as R.J. Reynolds or Big Tobacco. Yeah, essentially I sold my soul to the devil. But before you judge me, let's get back to some context. So at the time I had just shut down a magazine, my passion project, that offered a lot of value to artists and creatives, but it wasn't paying me or them. So Camel comes along and offers me this opportunity and a nice salary to curate a space. And that's what they called me, a curator. I had a big budget to hire artists and musicians, and I could do whatever I wanted in that space, as long as it fit with the idea of engaging cultural influencers with the camel lifestyle. So working for Camel was one of the best experiences of my career, because early on, my ethical limits were tested. And I understood very quickly the power that artists held, and I decided that utilizing that magic to promote a product that did no good and legit harm to the world would never be okay with me. It was a really weird space to be part of for a couple years. They hosted these corporate retreats where they would like fly everyone from around the country that worked for Camel into like basically a hotel attached to an airport, and then they would brainwash us. Just kidding, kind of. Anyways, two really good things came out of this experience. Back to context, because this was tobacco, so none of these events could be promoted online, also why I have no pictures to this day. So I had to promote through word of mouth or through collaboration with others. I had to give up space for their ideas and their networks. I learned a lot about relationship building. I learned a lot about creating an audience, about trust and transparency. It was important for me that artists were okay with being paid by a tobacco company and what they were attaching their names to. Most of them were like, just pay me. I also gained something really significant. Because Camel had titled me a curator, I started thinking about that role and that profession. And I don't think that I had ever thought about being a curator, because the old school definition of a curator is grounded in museums, which felt very pretentious and elite to me. But Camel actually made it more accessible to me. And so I took that with me out of their context and into mine. So a lot of other things happened from that point of self-discovery to building an actual curatorial practice, but we're going to fast forward to today, where for the past 5 years, I have been the curator and co-founder for a visual art exhibition space called Public Functionary. And after everything I've told you, maybe you're thinking, okay, so this is her final creation, the challenges and the learnings, this is what success looks like. She has her own business, a well-known, established gallery that's very popular. Not so fast. Public Functionary succeeds on many levels, but it is certainly a struggle. Public Functionary is the hardest thing that I have ever done and still do. It challenges me regularly. It is always a work in progress. It is always experimental. The gallery business, the nonprofit art sector, not lucrative without an insane amount of work and investment, that's for sure. And I'm still working on it. I do also have to mention that I teach and I run my own art consulting business. That's the work I do to make a living, though it's connected to the reputation and the experience I have from Public Functionary. For the last 5 years, this space has been producing art exhibitions by emerging artists and cultivating a space that is truly inclusive. Public Functionary is not my job, but it is an expression of my work. I'm the curator of a space that feels limitless in possibility. It's not an organization. It is a studio for innovation and change. It is not a gallery. It is a platform for cultural production. The social value of this space exceeds any financial reward. The success of this space is framed through the context that I choose to see it in. At the core of it, I am doing the same work I've always done, perhaps just with more depth. Public Functionary is really just my context for now. So, if I can leave you with anything, it would be to trust the way that the dots connect, to focus less on what you do, and instead on why you do it and how you do it. Find the grand temples in your context. It's been a really daunting thing to think about telling my story when so much of my work is about uplifting the stories of others. So I just want to thank Creative Mornings for their invitation to speak, for Mixed Blood for the space, and to all of you for being here. Thank you.